This really happened to me, and you can believe every word I'm about to say. I'm not proud of how long it took me to fight back, but the bruises on my heart are real, and so is the way I got even. I was standing in my shotgun kitchen off Magazine Street, stirring a roux in my old cast-iron pot, when my phone lit up with a notification and revealed Jessa's face, my friend, beaming over a headline that said, "Bayou Bombshell, the gumbo recipe that will save your weeknights." It was my gumbo, word for word, right down to the "let it whisper" cue my grandmother used to say when the stock went in. The open tab belonged to Home Crate, a glossy national meal kit outfit, and the photo showed Jessa holding a sachet of spice, labeled with the exact teal script I'd drawn at my kitchen table. My niece Raven and 2 market helpers were gathered around the stainless table icing down shrimp, and they went silent as if a thunderhead had rolled into the room and sucked all the air away. I set the wooden spoon down and felt the tile cool under my bare feet as a second notification came, this time a tag from Jessa's Instagram. I finally cracked it. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. When I tell you I am not a young woman, I say it to remind you how foolish pride can be at any age. I turned 64 last spring, and my gumbo, Mabel's gumbo, carried my husband and me through the lean years after Katrina and kept me steady when the cancer took him 10 years later. I learned it in Plaquemines Parish from my grandmother, who had that soft, decisive way of handling food that made even the onions surrender a little faster in her palm. After my husband passed, people started inviting me to bring pots to block parties and church picnics, then to sell by the quart at the Crescent City Farmers Market in Uptown. The line kept getting longer. A young chef at Cochon Butcher gave me a nod once while he chewed and said, "Ma'am, if you ever bottle that spice, I'll stock it." I didn't know a cap table from a jar cap, but I knew people were hungry for what I had. That's when Jessa slid into my life, all glossy hair and big city lilt, a transplant from Los Angeles who said New Orleans had healed her creative burnout. She first found me at the Green Room pop-up by the Rusty Nail on a Thursday night, where I set out a battered hand-lettered sign that said, "Mabel's Gumbo, hot." She wore a crushed raspberry-colored top like a fruit you could bite, and she filmed herself blowing steam off a spoon and asking me 200 questions while her ring light made my kitchen freckles shine like dew. "You need a brand," she said urgently, leaning across my folding table like we'd known each other for years. "And I can help you get one, if you'll let me." Jessa knew everyone, apparently. She was in media and between projects, which I now know can mean anything and nothing. The next thing I knew, she was picking me up in her hybrid and taking me to spots I'd never eaten because I always worked, the joint for ribs, the Ruby Slipper for breakfast, and a late lunch at the Elysian bar where the windows made you feel like you were on the inside of a lemon. At her insistence, we opened an LLC called Mabel's Whisper, and she filed the paperwork with a flourish, promising she'd cover the fees until I scaled. She stood in my little kitchen while I simmered seafood stock and talked about packaging and margins like sorcery. "Your spice blend is the crown jewel," she said. "We lock that down." I told her the blend lived in my head and in an old tin box behind my flour bin, where I kept the measurements scrawled in pencil on recipe cards. She photographed nothing, wrote nothing, and that made me relax. We did sign an NDA. She printed off a template and got notarized at a UPS store on St. Charles Avenue, and I locked the recipe back in the tin with shaking hands, feeling like I had strapped a baby into a car seat for the first time. She brought me a security tin with a cheap little key and said, "For extra drama, Em." I laughed and put it on the shelf above the stove where I could look up and see it glint while I stirred. For a few months, it was bliss. We designed a label, teal letters like the color of the lake on a clear day, and a small spoon silhouette, handle up, as if reaching for the moon. We sold packets at the Crescent City Farmers Market, next to the mushrooms from Covey Rise and the crates of satsumas. People came up and told me stories about their grandmothers, and I handed them my spice and promised it would behave like a good guest in their kitchen, enhancing everything and overstaying nothing. Jessa filmed and posted and said words like engagement and retention, and my Venmo beeped like a little brass bell every weekend. The first itch of trouble came tiny, like a mosquito you keep waving away. It was a night at Bacchanal Wine in Bywater, and we were sharing a board and a cheap bottle in the courtyard. A man in a crisp polo, he introduced himself as a category manager at a company whose name I recognized from every podcast, turned to me and said, "We're investing in pantry essentials with a regional story." He looked at Jessa when he said, "investing," and she did this little nod that felt like a conversation I hadn't been invited to. Later, as we walked to the car, she said, "He's nobody. Don't stress." Her voice was light, but her keys jangled like tiny cymbals when she fidgeted with them. Then came the Instagram reels. She posted a 30-second teaser with a blurred packet and my teal spoon silhouette, captioned, "I've been working on something big." The soundtrack was a thumping track that didn't belong, in a kitchen where a roux was learning patience. I felt it then, the off note, the way she angled the camera to hide my hands and show her own smile. I told myself I was being old-fashioned. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself you can be grateful and cautious at the same time. When the Home Crate headline hit my phone that morning, I knew those soft reassurances had been lies I'd told myself because they were easier to live with than the truth. The article read like an autopsy of my kitchen. Bayou Bombshell Spice Blend promised authentic South Louisiana depth and made adorable little jokes I used to make at my table, like, "Let the pot whisper." The bullet points matched my process in a way no imitation could have. Down to the odd rest I always gave the roux while I cut the Holy Trinity into dice as small as a prayer bead. The caption thanked culinary consultant J.C. I didn't need a genealogy test to know who that was. Raven looked at me over the iceberg mountain of her headphones. "Auntie, did you give her the full recipe? Like, the exact?" "We signed an NDA," I said, stupidly, as if a notarized sheet of paper could conjure the spice back from every warehouse in the country. The comments on Jessa's post were an altar of fire emojis, purchase links, and praise. Her DMs must have detonated. Mine remained quiet, a tiled floor after the dancers have gone home. A second post appeared, Jessa in a studio kitchen, hair pulled high and a clean apron cinched tight, tearing open a Bayou Bombshell sachet and smiling with her teeth. "No secrets, just love," she chirped. I felt something inside me harden like a caramel you overcook. I picked up the wooden spoon with both hands to stop the tremble. I texted Jessa. "Is this a joke?" Her read receipt turned to read, and then nothing. Minutes, a half hour. I dialed. She let it ring. When she finally wrote back, it was 6 tiny words. "You're overreacting. Let me explain." "Explain," I said aloud to my empty kitchen, "how you climbed into my memories and made a fortune off what fed me." She suggested we meet at Café du Monde, a place too bright and public for me to show my hurt the way it wanted to be shown. I went anyway because pride has always been quieter than grief in me, and I wanted to look her in the eye and ask, why? I took my tin box off the shelf before I left. The key bit into my fingers as I twisted it open. The cards were still there, edges soft with age, and a film of flour dust. I pressed the tin to my chest like a prayer book, and then set it back on the shelf, turned off the gas, and told Raven to cover the shrimp. At Café du Monde, the powdered sugar made deceit look like it could be sweet. Jessa slid into the chair and reached across the table as if her touch would deny what was true on the page. "Mabel," she began, her voice tilted concerned, "I love you. I did this for us." "For us," I repeated, like a fool, learning the language of a scam while it was happening. I set the print out from Home Crate between us. It looked like a glossy obituary for my trust. Jessa's eyes grew wide in a way that would have fooled someone younger than me. They simplified it, she said quickly. It's not your full method. It's what I always told you. We'd need a version for scale. But the heart, that's the same. And you can't own a culture. You didn't just scale a flavor, I said quietly. You lifted my life. That NDA wasn't a vibe, Jessa. It was a boundary. She shrugged. NDA, NDA. You signed a template. You never registered anything. I mean, come on. Let me take this out nationally, and I swear we'll carve you in. I'll fix the paperwork. I already talked to their lawyers. You'll be grand. My coffee tasted like metal. You talked to their lawyers? Of course I did. She smiled then, clean and hard like the top of a creme brulee before a spoon hits it. Because you weren't ready to, and now we're here. I could have thrown the beignet. I could have thrown the table. I did neither because I knew suddenly that the only thing that would keep my grandmother's voice from becoming a ghost in a stranger's mouth was something harder than sugar and louder than a shout. I stood and left her with the powder dusting her lip like a lie. By the time I reached Jackson Square, her PR blast had gone out. My phone trilled with a press inquiry that used my name in the past tense and called Jessa the woman bringing Mabel's whisper to the world. Then, as if on cue, a tap came on my shoulder near the cathedral, and a man in a navy suit handed me a cream envelope heavy as a stone. Ms. Mabel Duplessis, you've been served. The lawsuit's first page waved in the humidity like a flag. I hadn't even read to the second count when the cathedral bells began to ring, and I realized I was about to walk into a courtroom not to protect my recipe, but to defend my name against a woman who had stolen it. And when I opened the pleading there, just a block from where tourists posed with Go cups, I saw the claim that made my stomach drop through the flagstones. They were suing me for defamation over an email I hadn't written yet. I went home feeling like the city I loved had tilted a degree, and when my door shut, the single thought that held me steady was a stubborn one. If she thought I would fold, she didn't know me at all, because I know how to build a roux, and I was going to build a case, slow even, and so hot it would darken without burning, and I was going to stir it until it stuck. The first phone call I made the next morning was to a man named Marcel Broussard, whose card I kept tucked under my grandmother's recipe for oyster dressing. Marcel had eaten my gumbo at a Knights of Columbus fundraiser and told me I reminded him of his auntie from Gentilly, who could make you feel safe with a ladle. He was a civil litigator with a small office on Baronne Street, a jazz poster behind his desk, and a reputation for making big firms look like they'd forgotten their homework. Mabel, he said when I told him everything, what this is theft. We're not going to let them convert your life into their line item. He cleared a sandwich plate off a chair for me and started a legal pad with the title DTSA, LUTSA, and NDA, Facts We Can Prove. Marcel listened to the parts most people treat like seasoning, important if they notice, easy to ignore when distracted, the little ritual gestures that made my gumbo mine. He asked practical questions. Who had the key to the tin? Who had ever seen the cards? Had I limited disclosure? Had I sold finished products or mixtures? Did I control the environment when assistants worked? You have to show reasonable measures to keep it secret, he said. Not perfect measures. Reasonable. You did that. He leaned back. We can bring this in federal court under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, and we'll tack on Louisiana's Uniform Trade Secrets Act for flavor. I don't want flavor, I said, the tiredness ringing in my bones like a spoon against a pot. I want the truth to be told, and them to stop. Then we'll seek a TRO, he said, temporary restraining order. We'll try for an ex parte seizure, but judges hate those unless someone's about to torch the evidence. We'll at least get them enjoined, and we'll put her on the record under oath. The thought of Jessa raising her right hand and promising to tell the truth made my breath go tight. She'll lie, I said. People do, he agreed evenly. But paper doesn't. We'll subpoena. We'll get the paper. He sent his assistant to make copies of the NDA, my little UPS notarized form suddenly becoming a brick in a wall, and he asked me to walk him through the acts of secrecy I'd taken, how the pre-measured spices stayed in the tin, how the blends were mixed in my kitchen alone, how Raven and the helpers did not handle the spice itself, how we labeled the packets and sealed them with me watching. He smiled when I told him about the little security tin Jessa had brought as drama. "She gave you drama, all right," he said, tapping his pen. That afternoon, we filed. I had never been inside the Hale Boggs Federal Building with purpose, only to drink coffee in the ground floor cafe with a cousin after jury duty. But walking through the metal detectors and looking up at the atrium, light felt like stepping into a different temperature of life. We marched to the clerk's office with our complaint, and when the file stamp came down, I felt the first calm I'd felt in 2 days. "We'll get a hearing," Marcel said. "Soon." Back home, I ordered a home crate box. I used an alias and had it sent to Raven's friend 3 blocks over so there'd be no funny business. When it arrived, we opened it like a bomb squad. Gloves, photos, and a scale to weigh the sachets. The Bayou Bombshell blend looked like mine when you hold a handful, the paprika bright as a carnival, and the little flecks of thyme like musical notes. We cooked it according to the sheet, and I tasted glass shards of recognition with the first spoonful. "It's mine," I whispered. "It's mine with training wheels." We sent the spice and our own blend to a food chemistry lab at Tulane in sealed bags labeled with case numbers. Marcel said a lab can't tell you a recipe is the same, the way a mother can tell you a child is hers, but it can tell you what's in it and how much. "If the ratios rhyme, a judge will hear music," he said. Meanwhile, I sent a preservation letter to Home Crate's legal department requiring them to hold every email, Slack message, invoice, test kitchen photo, and packaging mock-up that bore any relationship to Bayou Bombshell. The letter was a prayer and a threat. If they lost anything, a judge could punish them. If they kept everything, there would be a paper trail like boot prints in wet sand. Jessa texted me as if we were still friends. "Why are you doing this?" she wrote. "You're going to ruin this for both of us." Then came an email from a New York firm with a name like a marble lobby, accusing me of publicly disparaging their client and threatening to seek an injunction to silence false statements. I hadn't said a word on the record to anyone but Marcel. They were suing me for a defamation that hadn't happened yet, and that felt like witchcraft. We set the first hearing at the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Louisiana, 500 Poydras Street, in a courtroom where the flag stood still and the microphones smelled like disinfectant. The judge wasn't one of the celebrity jurists people tweet about. He was middle-aged, thoughtful, and impatient with anything that sounded like a press release. Jessa arrived in a cream suit and sunglasses she pressed flat to her head like a crown. Her lawyer was perfectly tailored and had a smile that said he never ran out of time in a day. Home Crate's counsel appeared on a screen from a conference room with view of a skyline windows that looked like a screensaver. Marcel stood and told the story the way it needed to be told, not with syrup, but with nails. The NDA, the secrecy measures, the sequence of access, the sudden duplication. He said, "My client," but I heard my grandmother every time. When Jessa's counsel rose, he made a little show of the NDA's templated language, tried to paint me as a nice lady with a folksy approach to secrecy and no real plan. He said the Home Crate recipe was independent development based on broad cultural knowledge. When Marcel showed the packaging mock-up with my teal spoon, silhouette, cropped, rotated, but unmistakable, Jessa's mouth twitched. The judge took it under advisement, but he looked at me when he said, "There's enough here I want to keep the status quo." He issued a temporary restraining order that afternoon. Home Crate was to pause shipments of Bayou Bombshell pending a preliminary injunction hearing in 2 weeks. He ordered expedited discovery. The papers hit Pacer by supper. Jessa stepped into the hallway and pressed her face close to mine. The cameras from a local station had caught wind of something and were setting up in the lobby. You think you won? She hissed softly, smile still bright for the glass. You don't know what winning even looks like. I know what losing does, I said. It tastes like cardboard and comes in a box. She laughed. Cute. What you did isn't cute, I said. It's theft. Her sunglasses went back on like a curtain coming down, and she said lightly, We'll see what your little NDA is worth, Mabel. I went home and watched the news, which put my face next to hers and used words like catfight and recipe feud in a way that made my liver ache. The anchor mispronounced Rue. My niece turned off the TV, hugged me, and said, We'll win. That night I lay awake, listening to the streetcar hum the way it does when you can't sleep. The phone buzzed at 2:13 a.m. with an email from Home Crate's discovery vendor. They had begun producing documents. I opened the first zip like a woman bracing for a wave, and there it was, an internal thread with a subject line that felt like it came straight from my kitchen, Mabel Blend, V5. Attached, a Google Doc tracked back to an account that began with J. Carraway. 2 days later, the Tulane lab report landed with a soft thunk in Marcel's inbox. He called me, his voice so calm I knew it was good. They match, Mabel, with intolerance that could only come from reading your ratios, and there's something else, something worse. The lab detected peanut oil traces in the Bayou Bombshell sachets, a cheap filler to extend the spice blend when mixed with hot fat, invisible in taste at low amounts, dangerous to those allergic when not disclosed. The Home Crate packaging listed proprietary oil in some shipments, in others, nothing at all. I sat at my table, the tin box of my grandmother's cards glinting on the shelf like a witness, and realized the next steps wouldn't just be about my story. If I didn't push, if I didn't keep pressing, someone could be harmed by her arrogance. The anger that came then was clean and useful, like flame under a pot. We flew into the motion wars like they were carnival, only with briefs instead of beads. Marcel filed a motion for a preliminary injunction with exhibits so heavy the e-filing system coughed twice. Home Crate moved to modify the TRO, claiming irreparable business, harm. Jessa's counsel tried to exclude the lab report as unreliable, which made Marcel chuckle before he shredded them for 5 pages on methodology and chain of custody. The judge set the hearing for a Friday, and by Thursday, the docket read like a serial novel. The morning of the hearing, I watched a live segment on a New York morning show where Jessa sat on a couch under cool studio lights, telling America that every Southern cook knows gumbo, and we're lifting up a tradition, while a staffer whisked a roux too fast, turning the color of despair. My stomach turned. I went to court, steady as a drum. The judge granted the preliminary injunction. He said the evidence of misappropriation was compelling and the risk of public harm from undeclared allergens unacceptable. He didn't mention culture. He mentioned law. He ordered Home Crate to recall any remaining packets and to preserve all communications. He allowed us to take Jessa's deposition in 7 days. We served a subpoena on Home Crate's Slack. We combed their emails for who knew what, when. We found a QA manager who had flagged the peanut oil and been told to keep it proprietary. Costs are out of control. We found an email from Jessa that made the skin on my arms rise like a pot about to boil. The old woman calls the rest period a whisper. Cute. Put that in the copy. The old woman was me, and I wanted to fold the screen into a paper airplane and throw it as hard as I could. The recall went public. The FDA sniffed around. A journalist called me and asked how it felt to be the woman whose secret recipe halted a national brand, and I swallowed my pride and said the only thing that mattered. If you bought that packet and have a peanut allergy, don't use it. A day later, a mother I would never meet took her daughter to Children's Hospital with a rash blooming red and frightening after a pot of shrimp and sausage they'd made with a Home Crate kit. The child stabilized quickly, thank God, but the allergic reaction was real. Documentation existed. The FDA called, the U.S. Attorney's Office did too. Suddenly, the fight wasn't only civil, it was criminal. And when the criminal investigation began, Jessa finally looked afraid. They brought Jessa in under subpoena first to testify before a grand jury about the labeling and the development process. I sat in a hallway outside a room I wasn't allowed to enter and listened to the white noise of bureaucracy. Marcel paced like a man across from a delivery room, every so often pausing to reread a case he knew by heart. Jessa walked past us like a woman in a magazine, but her eyes were dull beads. I remembered the first day she'd come into my kitchen and stood with her hands on the counter as if she'd built it, and I felt, finally, the temperature of my resolve. Steady, not screaming. I didn't need to gloat. I needed the law to do what it was built. For when we strip away the ceremony, protect what's yours, and keep liars honest when they can't keep themselves honest. She walked out 3 hours later with makeup 3 shades darker where the tears had made tracks, and reapplication went bad. Her mouth was a hard line. She didn't look at me. The U.S. Attorney's assistant, a young woman with eyes like defense glass, told us nothing. But the next week, an indictment came down under seal, and the week after that, an arrest, wire fraud, conspiracy to misbrand food, theft of trade secrets, words that sound like ice cracking. Jessa stood before a magistrate judge at the Hale Boggs building and tried to smile. She was granted bail with conditions: no contact with witnesses, surrender passport, stay in Orleans Parish. She posted the bond within hours. She left in a coat too big for the weather. Cameras flashed. I watched from across the street and kept my face blank. 2 weeks later, she violated her bail by texting the QA manager whose flagged email we had found. A text so foolish, it made me wonder if arrogance is a cousin to stupidity. "Don't say anything about the oil. They'll just use it to make me look bad." The manager handed it over immediately. The government moved to revoke bail. Her lawyer made the kind of arguments you make when the facts are a lollipop with dirt on it. We all returned to court. The judge, a tall man with a voice like the low end of a brass band, listened without blinking. He referenced the guidelines. He referenced the policy statements. He said, in a tone a teacher uses when she's done performing, "Miss Carraway, my tentative view," do you hear me? "My tentative view is custodial time in the vicinity of 30 months, given these facts and your conduct on release. Do not mistake my caution today for mercy." Reporters were in the back row, and his words traveled like lightning to the street. The phrase tentative sentence appeared online within minutes, and Jessa's counsel did a little dance of fury about prejudicial publicity that only made the phrase travel faster. Jessa looked small for the first time. The woman who had said NDA sh'enda pressed her hands to the table as if gravity had changed. The judge set a date for a bail revocation hearing, and then firmly a sentencing date later, pending plea or trial. He did not look at me, because this wasn't about me anymore, and yet everything in that room was about me, too. That night, the airport police at Louis Armstrong caught Jessa at a TSA checkpoint with a refundable ticket to Houston. She said she was visiting a cousin. The agent said she had a hearing Monday. The cuffs went on with a snap I didn't hear but could imagine perfectly, the sound of a jar sealing shut. At the revocation hearing, the judge used fewer words. He remanded her to custody pending trial. The media used a phrase I didn't, "fallen foodie," as if being near a kitchen gave her a halo. I went home and cut onions until my eyes were spicy with something I could name. I didn't want a woman in prison as my victory banner. I wanted accountability. The kitchen taught me something about heat. Too low and nothing happens. Too high and you burn what could have fed you. Justice needs a simmer. Jessa's lawyers called Marcel with an offer that sounded like a witch's bargain. If I agreed to a mutual non-disparagement clause and dropped my civil claims, she would acknowledge hurt in a way that would fit into a segment on daytime television. Her voice came onto the line, silk over wire. "Mabel, we can still make money together. Let's package your story. Everybody is eating narrative." "People already ate your narrative," I said. "They just didn't know it had peanuts in it." Silence. Then she said, low, "You could have been my mother?" "I am someone's mother," I said, "and someone's widow, and someone's grandmother's granddaughter. You are not someone's anything to me anymore." I hung up because some doors deserve to be closed gently, and some should be slammed so hard the frame trembles, and what she did to me required the slam. The FBI sat Jessa down again with a new set of questions about the labeling. The grand jury issued a superseding indictment to add counts. Homecrate offered cooperation instantly, their general counsel's letter honeyed with regret. They settled with the government on civil penalties, a consent decree, and a promise to enhance compliance and value culture responsibly, like a potted plant they had forgotten to water. We set our civil case on a track that dovetailed with the criminal one. Discovery ran like a river. The truth, when piled, looks bigger than the lies that try to bury it. On the day of sentencing, a gray rain fell, New Orleans rain that doesn't commit to a storm, but ruins your hair anyway. We went to the Hale Boggs building early. My niece held my hand. The courtroom filled with people who came to watch a woman face a pile of words that would mean time. The judge took the bench. The lawyers did their lawyer dance. The prosecutor spoke about guidelines and harm and deterrence. Marcel, seated with me, nodded at moments like punctuation marks where justice should go. Jessa's counsel asked for probation, calling her a first-time offender and a creative professional who got out over her skis. He brought up charity work I'd never seen and apologized to me so many times it felt like a performance. Jessa herself stood to speak, and her voice was quieter than Café du Monde, quieter than the segment on the morning show, quieter than her texts. She said she was sorry she had misunderstood. She said she wanted to make it right. She did not say theft. The judge looked at her for a very long time. He mentioned the children. He mentioned the company's compliance failures. He mentioned the NDA. And then he spoke a number that settled in the air like a spoon on a saucer. 30 months. He added restitution. He added a special condition I had never expected but felt like the law remembering who it's for. She was barred from owning or managing any food brand during supervised release without court approval. The courtroom made that soft, muffled sound it makes when breath leaves a dozen bodies at once. Jessa nodded as if she understood math. Her hands were cuffed in front, and a marshal asked if she wanted a moment with her counsel. She did. She did not turn to look at me. Afterward, outside, the air smelled like wet stone and coffee. A reporter shoved a mic toward me. "Ms. Duplessis," he said, "are you satisfied?" The word was so wrong my mouth wouldn't say it. I said, "I am grateful the court heard the truth." The civil part that remained moved in step. We converted the preliminary injunction to a permanent one by consent. Homecrate cut a check that made my hands shake when I held it only because it meant I could pay Raven's tuition and replace the water heater and fund something I had dreamed about on nights I couldn't sleep. A small culinary scholarship at Dillard University in my grandmother's name, the woman whose hands taught me to stir. I brought my gumbo back to the market that fall because kitchens are where I heal. I started taking notes on everything, measurements, quantities, training logs, the mundane acts that make secrets defensible. I licensed the spice to a local company in a deal where my lawyer smiled because he liked the royalties. I did not do morning shows. I let word of mouth walk where it wanted to, and it walked where it always walks when something is good, from kitchen to kitchen, hand to hand, prayer to prayer. Commander's Palace invited me to a Sunday lunch to honor women who keep the kitchen, and I wore a dress my husband would have liked and let myself cry behind a napkin when the bread pudding came. Pesh let me teach a Sunday school of sorts to their staff about roux and patience. A young cook asked me what justice tasted like, and I told him, "It tastes like the first spoonful when the roux has gotten exactly to the color of a beer bottle, and you know you waited long enough and didn't scorch it." Some nights, when the city is quiet in that way it does, after the last streetcar hums past, I think about the words the judge said in court when he leaked his tentative sentence at the revocation hearing. How the room had air that changed when certainty came in. How Jessa's face finally registered consequence before she expected it. How the phrase traveled outside like gossip, and whether it made her hands shake when she held on to anything afterward. I do not feel triumph. I feel the seriousness of all of it. There are people who will tell you revenge is dirty. Cooking is dirty too, if what you mean is it requires your hands and your patience and your willingness to stand at heat and take it. What I want you to know is this. I didn't club anyone over the head with a pot. I used what I had, truth, paper, the law, and a recipe I kept secret like a promise. I let the system work with a little push where it needed it. On the anniversary of the day I first saw the home crate link, I unlocked the tin box and took out my grandmother's cards. I ran my fingers over the pencil where her hand had pressed, and I read the line that always gets me. Let it whisper, and it will tell you what it needs. I put the cards back, relocked the tin, and set a pot on the stove. The fat shimmered, the flour went in, and I stirred with the steadiness of a woman who has tasted a lot of life and knows the difference between heat that cooks and heat that burns. Somewhere dark and cool, a sentence was being served. Somewhere bright and warm, a kitchen was teaching me, again, to wait. And when the roux reached the color my grandmother taught me to love, I stopped, breathed, and added the stock. And the sound it made in my kitchen was the sound of a promise being kept. The soft hush a pot gives off when it forgives you for all the times you almost gave up. I tasted, and it was right. I turned down the flame, let it whisper, and put the spoon to rest. The city exhaled, the tin on the shelf winked, and I thought of a woman who'd believed a secret was a thing to be exploited, not protected, and of a judge who had, in his way, told her what her future held before she could taste freedom. In the silence that followed, I set bowls for the people I love, and the last line of my heart spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Some recipes you share, and some you guard until the end, the ones that keep you whole and the ones that keep you safe. The end!